It's great to see faces out and see what's the great things that are happening in the city of Lynn Haven. Just a little bit of background and in terms of this project, many of you remember we got this grant back probably in about 2020. It took us about 2 years to get this grant through, dealing with several agencies. And then we finally got the okay to start the design of this grant, and Florida Architect won the bid for that. While they won the bid, we did go and have somewhat of a charrettes with many of the community that came out and decided there were things that they wanted to see on Florida Avenue. And so we had Lynn Cherry that came out then and led the community through some of the things they really wanted to see incorporated in the design. We turned those comments and suggestions over to Florida Architect, and they've done a very, very good job of incorporating some of these ideas that actually the community thought would be very good for our area here. We know that this is going to revitalize many parts of our city. Our city is growing and it's beautiful, but when I came on board, I just see Florida Avenue as a diamond in the rough, and we just need to ensure that it continues to grow and be beautiful and bring businesses within this area. And so that's what this grant is. It revitalizes and gives some great beautification to this area. And so we're pretty excited what Florida Architect has come up with, and they're going to share that with you. Ben and I have met with the business owners that will potentially be affected by this grant. And they have given us suggestions, which we've also turned over to Florida Architect to make some changes. And now I think we're at a point that we can share some things with you. So I'm not going to hold any longer. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Sorcy and his counterpart here, Antonia Desi. And then they have with them as well Patrick Hodges. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe, and then Joe's going to lead the discussion. Any grant related, we have city employees. Ben is here. I'm here that we can surely answer those questions. And just let me recognize the commissioners that are here: Commissioner Perno, Commissioner Peebles, Commissioner Ward. They are all here, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mrs. Gaynor, and thank you all for coming today. So, as you know, design is a process. We start with some ideas and some input. We kind of gel it to a point where we're at today, share some goals, some ideas, some concepts, and then that will get refined again. We will start engineering probably after we get some input from the citizens today, because the engineering places the actual light poles where they need to go, and working with AT&T and Florida Power to get as much underground as we can possibly get with the money available. So also in this presentation, you will see ideas and concepts that aren't necessarily part of the construction documents. In other words, we're making suggestions for development, infill lots, and some things I'll point out to you to encourage this economic development goal. That's what the grant is about, and that's what we're trying to inspire those investors to say, look, your name could be on this building, that kind of thing. So just to show what we have now, what it could be, and generate some interest and hopefully some investment. So as Mrs. Gaynor said, I'm Joe Sorcy with Florida Architects. Antonio Desi is the designer and planner for Florida Architects. And then the infamous Patrick Hodges with the Patrick Hodges Land Studio. And also Phil with Patrick working on the landscape architecture and the planning as well. It seems like that this time of day. So we do have some material here. Everything that will be on the slides will be up here on the table. We can talk about it after. You can come up and look, refer back to it. We can call up some slides later. We printed a few of the slides on boards just as reference as we go along and that we can talk about. So the number one goal is to help give Florida Avenue in Ohio, City of Lynn Haven, an identity of its own for low cost, low maintenance, high impact. Okay, so when we drive down Ohio Avenue, oh, we're in Lynn Haven. You know that because of the treatment in the streetscape. I mean, that's the idea. And so Chris says low maintenance, yeah, right. But when you consider some of the plantings that we're talking about in comparison to what we could be putting, expensive larger oaks and so forth, which create debris and leaves and things, that's maintenance. And so what we're after is something with high impact and lower maintenance than what it could otherwise be. Any questions so far? Thank you all for being here. Famous help desk guys back there doing the magic. Sure. So this is an overall model, if you will, of what you'll see on the slides. And you'll see that we do have, there's numbers on some of the images that refer to keys up on the key map to kind of show you where that view is taken from. So as you come up and look at the prints closer, you'll be able to see where those views are taken from. So this is an actual 3D digital model that's been rendered to give us a more realistic view of what this could be. So the main part of Ohio Avenue, or the center part, I should say, extending just south of Sheffield Park, all the way up to 7th. That's the real core of the downtown area, right? So part of the issue is connecting Florida Avenue with Ohio and Sheffield Park. That's the basis of creating that identity from the center out. So that corridor, that hallway, as Patrick will describe, connects Sheffield Park, City Hall, down across Ohio to Central Florida Avenue, and then branches out both sides from there. So when we talk about high impact, when we look at these types of plantings, you might think, wow, there's so many of them, but you're looking at it in perspective. So as you're driving down, the gaps between them are pretty far. So a shopkeep wouldn't have to worry about blocking the view that you would if you had oak trees, right? Because oak trees are going to spread way out and they're going to block more view. Whereas these are taller and narrower, so you see more in between them, but you still get that unique look that nobody else has. And so that's one of the goals that we were after.
Southern red cedar, which
My idea was to create
scenario that we have to create has to take in account multiple speed that we may travel through or walk through. So that's where the landscaping and the softscaping and the hardscaping of all had to come together to identify on one side the intersection between Ohio and 9th Street as the main point of access, iconic experience for between the fact that on the east side we have the city hall and that opportunity to actually explore on the west side. So we've taken that one as the main point to start our conversation about how we can enlarge, the scope of the grant and start looking into Florida Avenue being a kind of a back road and how to create a frontage now at this point, Florida Avenue at the proper speed. That it's walking, it's biking, it's kids going to school, coming back. It's more of a smaller neighborhood environment that we wanted to create.
And Joe mentioned the concept of the hallway, and that's what we refer to 9th Avenue as the hallway, because that's going to be the connection from City Hall and the downtown area over to Florida. And you'll see as we go through the concepts, we have totally different concepts for how we're treating the landscape of Ohio, because it's a rapidly moving, heavy traffic collector road, than what we're using on Florida. Although we have a lot of unifying elements that are the same that are carried throughout the overall concept, they're distinctly different because they're just two totally different modes of transportation, or traffic loads and so forth. And so the whole idea is to make that hallway much more conducive to pedestrian traffic while still allowing the free flow of vehicular traffic by in making the sidewalks much more generous, providing seating, benches, things of like that nature. And you'll see that the plant material that we're using on Florida is quite different because it's a different goal that we're trying to accomplish there. We've got more shade trees. We can't have as many as we'd like because we have so much overhead electric lines. But where we didn't have that, we've used larger canopy trees.
And I think that on working with this, I think that the idea of the uniqueness of the trees we've selected for Ohio is really, to me, it's one of the biggest things. Because, if you think of streetscapes and go to any North Florida town, you want to. Pensacola, just anybody who's done a streetscape, planting, or even go to Louisiana, anywhere in the Southeast, you'll always see the oak trees, or crepe myrtles, or elms, or you'll see the monumental palm trees and things like that. And honestly, using these trees for this streetscape, you're going to have something very unique. I can't think of another streetscape in any town around here that has anything like that. And I think that what you already have up and down Ohio with the large palms that we planted in the park, around the city hall and all that, you already have a flavor of that. And so what Patrick was talking about is we're going to have this uniqueness up and down Ohio, both for the look of it and also the speed of the vehicles is different up and down there. So you want that spacing. But what we're doing is over on Florida, like Patrick was saying, we're taking the palm tree motif that you have at the park and the City Hall and Police Station, and we're flipping that over to Florida. So it's kind of like bookends. So we're repeating that design character over there just to tie the whole thing together. So although we have a different streetscape, the look of it up and down Florida, there's that connection to Ohio also, while still preserving that real unique look we're getting for Ohio Avenue.
Exactly.
So I mentioned that design's a process, and now getting to this point, hopefully getting some good positive feedback and some ideas, thoughts, we'll be ready to start some engineering. One of the goals is to get as much of the overhead wires underground as possible. Obviously, the grant is not going to support by itself everything in a master plan. Master plan takes time to implement. There are other grants available. Ben has been working on identifying those and working towards submitting for those. So although the master plan gives you that overall grand idea, we want you to understand that we have to take it in steps. And I think everyone would agree, hardening the power and the communications is a good attribute to the master plan. So wherever possible, like some of the wires on Ohio, they're only serving light poles and AT&T. So there's no reason why those poles and those wires really need to be there. We're going to be putting underground power anyway for the lighting. So that takes that out of the equation. And then if we can get AT&T and our partner with Dewberry Engineers, Morgan Hurst, we'll be working with AT&T to see how much of that they'll be able to get out of the way for us and hopefully bear some of that cost as well. So it is a process. You know, more funds would be necessary other than the initial grant to accomplish everything, but strategically planning in steps, you know, so that you see the impact, but not have to go back and redo things to implement what eventually needs to be done.
Especially on this illustration, especially on these illustrations and on the 3D views, you're going to see some buildings are filling in empty lots. The idea behind it is to show you how the city can possibly look in 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now, so that you can start seeing that, you know, there is a vision that it's actually already taken in consideration, you know, the future development and the feasibility from a financial point of view for investors to come in and want to developing further.
So we're going to show you some of the drawings, the concept drawings, and Patrick and Phil will, and Antonio will kind of tell you about each one of these sections. So each drawing will have a key map down here, and it'll show you basically what area, and that's kind of hard to read because it's a little washed out, but we'll describe where it is, like this one's Florida Avenue, 10th to 9th Street. But we'll talk just briefly about some of the overall goals. Obviously, you can't read all this now. You will have, I guess, access to it, so you can study it at your leisure and be able to soak that up and then respond, you know, with some additional comments.
Okay, so this is Florida Avenue streetscape beginning at 10th and going to 9th. And 9th is, again, what we refer to as the hallway, so in a minute we'll get to that. But you can see what we've done is we've come in and we've broadened the sidewalks significantly. We've added larger trees where we didn't have overhead electric to interfere with that. And then we've done, you know, other types of trees, understory trees, where we still had the overhead electric to be of concern. One of the things that is shown here is a walkway on the west side of Florida there. You know, there's two buildings there on the corner. And this would be a possible connection to future parking, a public parking area, and also serve as a good connection to the school. In addition to, you know, the improved sidewalks on 9th. And that also has a crosswalk that takes you to the grocery store, because one of the things that we think might be possible is, you know, working with the grocery store owner is to improve the access, you know, perhaps have better pedestrian access even through the rear of the building. So you get a glimpse here, if you look to the right where you see the letter B in the intersection, you see a little bit of sneak peek of what we're talking about with 9th. That intersection would be paved, the streets would be resurfaced with a concrete unit paver that's shaped like a brick, and it's going to be in a herringbone pattern. Then we have a different concrete unit paver, it's a cobblestone shape that we're using for the parallel parking spaces, and then a third larger, you know, unit concrete paver for the sidewalks and for the crosswalks. So those are a subtle way of basically, you know, defining the different modes of transportation, the vehicular versus the pedestrian, and then of course, you know, the parking. So I think all of those elements with the planting, we haven't done a lot of shrub planting. We're doing mostly trees, and we haven't identified specifically individual trees. What we've done is we've listed a series of options for the different types. For the canopy trees, for example, oaks, elms, maple, et cetera. And then for the understory trees, things like native hollies, like Dahoon holly, and things of that nature. Right. And the whole notion of the resurfacing is that we won't have to tear up the concrete street beneath it. We'll actually come in on top of that with a setting bed for the pavers, and then that enables us to eliminate the vertical curb. We're raising that section of the roadway, and then we'll transition across the parallel parking to the sidewalk. So basically, it's a mountable curb, and it would make it much easier for ADA compliance, for example.
And the hardscape combinations Patrick was talking about, we're using 3, and they're all very different. I think, even without looking at the trees and the new plantings, just doing that's going to be beautiful. I mean, it's going to look like a completely different part of your town. That's what that's going to look like. And as far as the trees goes, yeah, what we're doing there, what Patrick's talking about is that where we don't have the overhead lines, we're going to have larger trees. That'll be very beautiful. But there are a lot of overhead lines. And you can see already in the plan there, you can see where the letter B is. Well, those tree symbols that are on each side, right and left of B, those are the big towering palm trees that you have here at the park. So there's our icons. That's how we connect to the park. That's what we were talking about earlier. And then the other thing that we should probably talk about too is that the trees that we've selected here, they're never going to outgrow space in the streetscape. What we're trying to do is allow for in the future that the properties up and down this streetscape, that they can redevelop with practically building, their properties can build all the way to the lot line, because the trees we've selected in the configuration will never interfere with anything that's proposed for any of those properties in the future. So it covers all those things.
We're hoping that, this type of hardscape and infrastructure improvement will stimulate the kind of development that Ben and others have mentioned that you're trying to accomplish here. We think it's a very achievable goal to do that, and we think this project will help expedite that type of interest and perhaps stimulate, the type of new businesses coming into that Florida Avenue corridor.
Safety is another consideration. So as you heard Antonio say, when you have events and people, pedestrians and strollers, negotiating with curbs can be hazardous. That's one area. Yes, of course, we'll eventually have shown bollards to keep people from driving up on the sidewalk and, that kind of thing. But there are a couple of instances, particularly the grocery store and that corner right there where, we'll see in the renderings where there was a continuous curb all the way, or a continuous drive all the way from the radius of the curb at the turn all the way down, so people would be pulling in and out into traffic. That's dangerous. And as we get more and more traffic and pedestrians, that's what we want, because pedestrians walk with what? Wallets. That's what you need in the business. So we want them out of their cars. We want it safe for them to walk and not have vehicles backing up out into traffic, with pedestrians going back and forth, et cetera. So here's a couple of views, and you'll see the top where it says current view and future view. So that's an example of us doing a little magic and just showing an infill building along with the streetscape, so that, you know, these are things that could happen, could inspire someone to develop a property. And more businesses, you know, those boats that raises everybody's business, because more pedestrians come down and they walk by, oh, let's go in here. And, you know, guess what? They have their wallet with them. That's the idea. So getting rid of some overhead lines, and again, we haven't shown all of the Hall of Fame light poles like we have around here, the park, the city hall area, but those same light poles with the banners and those kinds of things will be placed along when we get into the engineering side of it. We're just not showing it here in the renderings.
That you see with the building and the green growing up the wall, that's actually the west wall of the grocery store. And so what we're proposing to do there, or excuse me, that's the north wall fronting along 9th. So the idea there is to create almost like an outdoor farmer's market display area. You know, it can be on a regular scheduled basis. But to soften the building, you know, we've talked about the concept of a green wall that's basically, you know, just a simple mesh system with climbing vines. And then, of course, having sort of pop-up idea in terms of how the retail would be handled during the market. You show them the plan for 9th? Okay, there we go. And so the idea here is to, you know, I mean, you just had engineering done for this intersection, and we've, you know, used that same engineering as our background for our design, but we've eliminated parking on the north side of the grocery store there. And as Antonio and Joe both pointed out earlier, we've come up with a whole new scheme and layout for the parking in the grocery store parking area, which, you know, is not necessarily a function of the grant, but it shows how you can take, you know, that same space, add a ton of green space in the middle of it, and still come out with 10 additional spaces over and above what the current count is, even though we eliminated those ones along 9th that back into 9th. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish. As Joe pointed out, health, safety, and welfare is always foremost in our thinking, in addition to function and aesthetics. Yeah, on 9th, on the northwest corner and the southeast corner, we've got these sign walls proposed that are similar to what, you know, is already taking place here on your City Hall site. And those are basically, you know, welcome to Lynn Haven type signs. So I think we have a rendering of that, don't we? Got the clicker. Yeah, these are just more of the views that show the future state that we're envisioning. And I think, you know, you can see where we've clustered the large date palms at the corners and the intersections to make that visual connection back across to Sheffield Park. Phil, you want to add?
Also, you can see there, like Patrick said, the bottom middle image, that's your iconographic palms up from Sheffield Park, like Patrick said, and they're just at the intersections. And we've done them in doubles, like that, formal doubles. That's kind of like you can think of it as double columns on a piece of architecture. That's that kind of statement that we're looking for. The other thing that makes it beautiful with a backdrop against the park is, in the park, you've got a little bit more of a freeform spacing of those really monumental trees. And this contrasts in that way, and it's a little more formal and not quite as many. So it has that play there too. And then the top middle image there, now that's what we're talking about putting some trees in where there's no power lines. And these, something like that would be like a holly, a little bit offset from the building. And as those trees grow and mature, when they're the biggest they can get and they're the most beautiful, that's when they'll really be, they'll reach the intent of the design. And again, as I said earlier, they're never going to outgrow their situation. And that's one of the problems we're having with the existing trees out there. And we talked about this in a meeting beforehand, is a lot of the trees are planted under power lines. And even though they're pretty right now, when they start maturing and get to what they want to be, they're going to have to come out. So we've been very careful with the power lines and also understanding we want to redevelop these properties or allow that to happen for future owners or current owners. And so that gives you a really good image right there, that bottom middle and the top middle of, two different ways to look at that. This is a good sheet right here.
The idea behind it, as you can see here, it's also to show you kind of a lifestyle shot where you can see a mix of two-story buildings. So what if we stop, developing only one story and we start seeing the second story coming on top of it? Or we also have some, you will see also in the future renderings, 3-story and 3 stories and a half with a finished out attic. So that we're still, below the 40 feet elevation, but we start seeing more intensity on the lots, because eventually, it will be the organic growth of what we see in this district. Now here you can see these are different shots still on Florida. So on the top left side, there is a county-owned building, and there is a parking that it's not. It's a little bit underutilized, so we reorganize also the entrance, the access to that parking and the parking layout. And then on the, we create a pocket park, more of an Instagram photo opportunity for the backside of the grocery outlet. It's located so close to 9th and 9th. It's an easy access to Florida Avenue. So that's why we tried our best to start dressing up, going north and south from the intersection of 9th and Florida. So if you go to your top right rendering, that one, it's that possible access to additional parking. Parking eventually will be, it's a beautiful problem to have, because when we have parking issues, it means that we're actually in business. So it's better to think that the prime lots on Florida Avenue should not have parking. Parking should be in the back, should be elsewhere, so that we want as much possibility for those wallets to walk into a shop and not into a parking lot. So that's why we try to define many different strategies to bring parking in phases to the possible financial and economic development of Florida Avenue.
One thing, don't get hung up on the images of trees. Some are crooked and some, we work with the software we have available. And so when we pick a tree out of the software, it may have some fronds that look like they could be trimmed, all that kind of stuff. So it's the idea and the concept, not necessarily the literal, tree that you're looking at right there. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then also, you saw where there are nooks, not just pocket parks, but there could be little recesses along the facade of the street that allow multiple storefronts in a smaller footprint. So as business comes in and they're developing some of these shops, having that little recess, some seating and, that kind of thing encourages more smaller businesses to come in and rent those areas.
Here we can see the example.
This is one of the parking areas we were asked to take a look at, and so we've reconfigured the parking. This is the city-owned building, or it's the county's building, tax collectors. We have much more efficient parking, and we created a landscape buffer along the frontage of Florida Avenue where we could have trees and then some shade trees in the parking area itself. And of course, we're going to preserve the beautiful majestic oak there on the corner by the tax collector's office, but do have the parallel parking continuing along, all the way along the east side, particularly. But there's ample parking configuration of the parking we've done in the tax collector's property.
One of the things about the go back. Oh, yeah, that one right there. One of the things about the parking lot layout there, and this is true for the grocery store and for several others that we're looking at. You know, a lot of these parking lots were built a long time ago, and they were laid out in a very inefficient way. You know, these days with land at a premium and sites tiny, you know, we've learned how to just really condense, you know, a lot of cars into a smaller space, but still have safety. And so really what we found in installing these new landscape buffers along Florida, which we're creating, we found that what we could do is we could do that by simply taking some of these really outdated parking lots and just what we're calling a lot of times just a restriping plan. You can take and leave most all of the paving and just resurface it without removing very much. And so we found, you know, really, we weren't really expecting it, but simply just just a different configuration of a lot of these old parking lots gives you that landscape space there. So we found that, and this one here was no different. And as Patrick said, that really beautiful big oak tree right on the corner, you can see how much space is being allowed for that. That's going to be a really beautiful spot there too.
Here you can see more of the projected development, you know, just ideas, and none of this is a design. It's just an idea of volume to see how Florida Avenue will look when we start going vertical, and the intensity of the development and how the landscaping plays with that. So this, I mean, we're going from the Masonic Lodge all the way back to the intersection with 9th. So this is kind of a mix of north and south of between 8th and 9th, and a little bit going over to 7th. That's what you can see there.
Right, so this features 9th Avenue, which we refer to as the hallway, and then you see in the lower right the redesigned parking area for the grocery outlet. And on the north side of the building, where we eliminated the head-in parking that actually came directly off of 9th, that's where we show the outdoor retail display area. Might be appropriate for weekend farmers market and things of that nature. Of course, you see a lot of landscaping that's been added. We've done some reconfiguration on the parking on the northwest corner here of Ohio and 9th, and I think we've received comments from the owners there that we have yet to address, but we appreciate and we will address. So.
You have to hold the mic right up to your mouth. Don't be shy. So there's some of those crooked trees. That came out of the software, I'm just telling you. So as you can see in a lot of these stretches, it's not a lot of crazy landscaping, right? They're spread out. It greens it up. You can see from the renderings, the understory and the canopy trees, the difference, but it brings life to the streetscape. And the different textures, different colors, you know, this is all part of that matrix, right? That creates that pedestrian area where people want to be, where they want to walk with their kids, etc. Yeah, more boring plans. Couple of renderings. We tried not to leave too much out, so you can study all this later, but gives you a couple different aerial views. I mean, I can see that retail area there on the north side of Grocery Outlet becoming a, kind of a centralized hub on the weekends, right? Or even during the week, it's different events. So getting people from the park to Florida Avenue, that whole idea of tying the landscape together, creating those bookends, as Phil said, and that experience for people to enjoy.
Idea is to establish a secondary access. I mean, a lot of times, even in Lynn Haven, it's a grid city, but it has a major corridor. So in so many different ways, from a planning point of view, behaves like a linear city. And the issue with linear cities is to create diversified interest across. So to develop then eventually future nodes, also for higher intensity in business to develop, it is important eventually to establish a counter corridor, and Ninth organically it really delivers that also because the position of City Hall. That's why for us it is so important to anchor a lot of the iconic elements around this intersection, from the greenery to the signage, and then the beginning of the going west bound to Florida.
We haven't done a lot of landscape development so much, or planting, but in this view, you see where the letter E is there at the pond. We are suggesting the addition of some large live oaks there to provide shade and, make the park feel more park-like. This one's a good view, because it does feature, the improved parking arrangement that we came up with for the grocery. And you can see that large island in the middle where we could put some really large shade trees. And then we have, as I mentioned, a net gain of 10 parking spaces overall. And we also have cart storage out there in the parking area at either end of the landscape tree island. So. Yep. Yeah, this is the north end of Ohio, yeah. So again, the future view and the current view.
On the top right, we're standing on Ohio looking south. So 9th Street, it's on our right side, so you can see the grocery outlet. And then the view below that one, it's facing west. So we can see the Mullins property on the right-hand side of 9th, on the north side of 9th, and then the grocery outlet on the south side of 9th. So that's kind of to give the idea, the before and after, and how the new signage with the city kind of comes to play. We decided not to put it on all four corners. We put it in pretty much most of the time. There is only one person driving. So really the driver is going to be the ones seeing the signage most of the time anyway. So it's kind of on the driver's side, and still creates that iconic look also because on this side we already have the City Hall.
One of the side streets, yeah. So we also came up with, more subdued, but some landscape and hardscape treatments for the side streets that connect from Ohio to Florida. 7th, 8th, and 10th, in addition to, the more dramatic changes that you see on 9th. So again, planting has been limited to, areas where we don't have a conflict with overhead electric. These are just, current and future views of the Ohio corridor. Yeah, these are, yeah. And I think some of these things are, you probably want to spend some time looking at the plans. I guess they'll be available on the website. Then we have a hard copy here, full size, and we have a couple of smaller copies that you're welcome to take the smaller copies with you.
This one is the example of the parking lot for the grocery outlet where, we managed to get more parking and also more landscaping. So I will say it's a win-win on all sides. It creates better use of the space and efficient parking too.
And these are images that sort of highlight the materials we're talking about using. As I mentioned, instead of honing in on a single street tree for Florida Avenue, we've got a variety. So there's still some refinement and selections to be made out of the choices that we've offered here in our plans, in the concept plans.
On the trees, piggybacking on what Joe said, probably what's going to wind up is when the final plans are done and all the selections are made, we'll probably actually go out in the field and tag each one of these. So, they're all going to be beautiful trees. Yeah, sorry.
Now, these are some great aerial views that kind of give you the big picture all in one shot, like a drone shot or something.
Guys think? Discussion? Comments?
Are we talking car or pedestrian along Florida Avenue? Both. Where did the pedestrian comes in? What area of Florida is pedestrian?
Florida. We more than doubled. That's correct. What we've done is we've reduced the width of the travel lanes, and at the same time, we've added parallel parking. And what the reduced width of the travel lane does is it allows more room for the parking, but it also tends to slow people down. It's a technique that's known as traffic calming. So that's part of the concept, is to slow the vehicular traffic down. Now, we can't really slow the traffic down on Ohio, nor have we attempted to do that. That's going to be free-flowing. But I think that the traffic on Florida tends to move slowly. It's a residential neighborhood. And so we don't think we've done anything to make it less appealing in terms of free-flowing traffic. It's just we've made it much more safe and appealing in terms of pedestrian movement. And the emphasis is on that.
Just to add on, I think Joe and his team applied a light road diet to Florida Avenue by adding all this landscaping. You're narrowing the travel lanes a little bit, which makes the traffic slow down. So overall, in this category, we challenged them to make Florida Avenue more pedestrian friendly, more inclusive, and less vehicular friendly. Because we want people to slow down on Florida Avenue. We want them to spend some more time and money on Florida Avenue. Question number 2. And then I'm going to pass it on to the next one.
Oh, many.
We'll come back.
Have you spoken to the business owners or the land owners that may be affected by all this?
Yes, we have. We have identified the businesses that will have a direct impact on the parking layout. And we had some individual meetings with them. Please keep in mind that the majority of this project is actually within the existing right-of-way. So we're not going on private property and building anything. All of these improvements, the landscaping, except the grocery outlet, parking lot, former Mullins Pharmacy. That's the only exception, but the rest is all within the existing right-of-way.
They don't.
It was
We
just
build
another
next
building
to it.
added to the, right next to it as an idea.
We're not talking architecture on this plans. Yeah, but
This would
it's
not be subject of this grant is, or this project is not to change anything on the existing building infrastructure. Yes, ma'am.
Behind where I am, where the cafe is, I see a big building there. It's behind Roberts Hall and us. That'll never work for sure, because Roberts Hall's going to need all that back area for parking, and nobody would even be able to get to us.
No, we have a building park there, but the idea is just to show density. It's not building plans. I mean, the idea is to show the density that is possible and the aesthetic impact. The idea behind it is not to build. I mean, we're not building buildings. We're not designing buildings. We're showing possible growth and how that affects the streetscaping of it. It's
Yeah. And the building that you're talking about is just, as
prop.
Antonio said, it was to show potential for future density. I think the architectural illustrations, we didn't actually change the architecture on any buildings. We showed what some new buildings might look like that would be 2 or 3 stories along Florida, but there's no proposed changes to buildings. And this is really more about the pedestrian streetscape and planting improvements that are supposed to be an incentive for future growth and development, vertical growth, buildings and new businesses and things like that. But this plan doesn't really propose new, architecture or buildings. It's just, we're just showing you what the future state could be like if it does work and creates that sort of incentive for future growth.
We have Mr. Levchuk here, has a question.
No, I think I want to reiterate what we're hearing from over here is I think what we need to see as a presentation is not y'all adding all these buildings, but to see what it's going to look like as a stamp today without all of this finery so that we know what we're getting into today versus what y'all are focused on as a maybe down the road. So just like we're concerned here about putting a building where we've got parking or structures and stuff like that, if the grant is for your construction, for your specific design, that's what we should be shown versus you using your own imagination for peripheral. Am I correct, folks?
Fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, we can develop some images as is without any future infill. Yeah, I mean, that's easy to do.
Next question right here.
I've got a couple of pretty easy ones. First, and I suspect I know the answer, is there any special accommodation or any planning to add to golf cart traffic in this particular area?
From a multimodal point of view, yes. I mean, it's possible that it will be part of the city ordinances if they are going to allow that. But the idea is to have multimodal access to, from the biking, etc.
But there's no specific design parameters to encourage or discourage that kind of traffic. Second question is, there's an alleyway that runs between Florida and Ohio from 9th down to, I believe it's 7th. I haven't heard that mentioned. Is there any plan to do anything with it, close it, add to it, beautify, eliminate?
Matter of fact, I mean, we're partially using it. Right now for access. So yes, I mean, we've not developed landscaping for it. So
Back alley would also be a possible plan B to relocate utilities from Florida Avenue to the back alleys. Putting utilities underground is very, very expensive. And moving it to the back alleys is maybe a more affordable option. Ms. Kiki?
You may have addressed this at the beginning and I missed it. The rationale about the elevation of the sidewalk with the street, is that not a safety issue?
No, because I mean, we'll have bollards to separate the traffic and the parking from the, we'll have bollards to separate the traffic. yes.
Ballards.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The grocery outlet parking area, you've talked to them, but what if in the future they decide not to accept this plan? What's the plan to beautify everything and then have the existing parking area? Because it is private property. And I'm assuming they'd have to pay for that portion of the construction.
No, actually, the Florida Commerce covers also private property improvements. I mean, that we can also find grant money too.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, there is actually, Florida Commerce is actually doing a lot of improvements in Panama City where they're going in private parking spots and changing parking with grant money. So that doesn't have to be necessarily their own money going into the improvements. Catherine?
Well, and still the total funding is not approved yet for this project, is it?
That is correct, yes. Okay, I'm going to ask Bobby to talk about the golf carts for a second. Bobby Baker is our Public Infrastructure Director.
Your question was allowing golf carts? Is that what you're?
Yeah, he wanted to know.
I mean, it can be. They're already allowed in there, and this is our approved crossing. So I guess we could work on designating parking spaces. Is that what you're looking at? Oh, well, they're already allowed in there, so we could look at possibly putting smaller parking spaces for golf.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a timeline for the major milestones in this project? Your best guess?
Well,
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So, depending on, I'm assuming that you all will take a couple of weeks to study this and get all the, comments written down and sent in, that kind of thing. We'll be developing some of those new images without the future structures, that sort of thing, that we can then push out there. Depending on how long it takes and when the city closes discussion on this session, we'll already be starting refining this while we're waiting on comments. We'll be starting some preliminary engineering so that we could start locating light posts and, a good idea of where all those things will go as well. And then we're going to come back to the citizens again with these refinements and new images, that sort of thing. I think the golf carts, bicycles, those are things that we should, investigate a little further. So this will be another round after this one. And hopefully we'll capture everybody's comments, incorporate, the thoughts and concerns. And then after that, we'll finalize any tweaks from that next session. And then by then, it'll just be a short time. Morgan, how long do you need? A day? It'll take several weeks to finalize the engineering after that. AT&T and Florida Power do not move quickly. But besides that, once we get into that last round of refinement, we have to do all the cost estimating. So we can put some costs to different elements and different phases of this project. Because That's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's going to come down to cost. So we'll be doing all that. And then in that final refinement, we hope to have those preliminary cost estimates. So probably 3 months.
I think I'd like to see the plans being completed before the end of the year, and hopefully we can start construction sometime next year. Please keep in mind, this is a grant. The funds have been reserved. We don't know what the construction cost is right now, the exact construction cost. We have an estimate. So all of this is contingent upon construction funding. So we may be able to start with a phase 1, possibly a phase 2, depending on how much the contractor will be charging us for the construction. Does that answer your question? There's another question here, Commissioner Peebles.
Thanks. I talked to a few business owners that couldn't make it tonight. One of the consensus questions was if there's any plans for some type of unique signage to give it to like a good aesthetic downtown.
Yeah, that's why we started. The first idea was on the backside of the grocery outlet, to create that identity of a pause, and then we can, continue throughout the corridor.
Brian, right? Your name? Sam. Thank you, Sam. That's a good question. So yes, there should be some direction, at least the guidelines of a concept for signage for streets, particularly any, public areas, pocket parks, that kind of thing. Maybe even some dedication type plaques that the city might want to come forth with. So yes, that's a very good question, and it should be in the flavor and the aesthetic of that period of what Florida Avenue wants to look like, what it wants to be, and tie into the existing city signage. Thank you. Good question.
Okay, I have a question. Was this originally a grant for the beautification or whatever of Florida Avenue?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, because I'm seeing a lot of stuff on Ohio Avenue, a lot of spending money there that could go over to Florida, and Ohio can come in the future because, I know it looks beautiful, but grant money's for what the grant money's for.
Actually, thank you for asking that question. The grant was very specific when it comes in terms of location, and in the upper left corner, you actually see the outline of the project area. Let me go. I think the
first one. Yeah.
There you go. So it actually it includes some 3 city blocks on Florida Avenue, 4 side streets between Florida Avenue and Ohio Avenue, and landscaping and lighting along Ohio Avenue from 7th Street all the way up to 12th Street.
Okay.
So that was the area that was defined when we wrote this grant application back in 2020.
Okay. And also, I'm not confused, but I know the traffic area on Florida Avenue will be condensed a little bit, but there'll still be two-way traffic, right?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so two-way traffic, larger sidewalks, more area. Okay, I was looking at all the pictures, but right in the center of 9th and Florida, how far in a direction other than the parallel parking will there be parking? I was trying to look at the maps.
I mean, we kind of stay away about 20 feet from the intersections, if that is what you're asking.
I mean, like from 9th Street down Florida Avenue, where would the next parking lot be? Or whatever. I know you have parallel parking along the street, but
yes.
It's not a concern of yours, but like I own a cafe and other food services will come in there, and our average customer is probably 60. They're not going to want to walk 6 blocks to eat.
Them till they're 90, though.
Well, that would be great. But, I mean, that's a long way. So I mean, it doesn't affect the lighting company or Roberts Hall, or it doesn't affect those people. Might affect the coffee shop or whatever, but
Yeah, but that's why you see part of the plan is also to look into the future parking. So not just on the line parking on the street itself, but also creating pocket parking right now, right away where the county has the Chuck Perdue's office. So that one, to utilize that as an expansion parking lot. And then we looked into several other strategic locations off Florida, but 1 block away. So that then we have that dispersed, not necessarily on the right of way of Florida, so that it's still in a very short distance to have access to it. No, we're not. No.
I know the side. A lot of our customers park on the side of grocery outlet, and that'll all be gone.
Yeah, but they have actually more parking now than they had before. So I mean, eventually, if you have an active downtown where a lot of people are using it with a pedestrian mode, you run out of parking spots. That it's a good problem, because that means that now you got 1,000 wallets walking around, hopping from shop to shop. That doesn't happen. When they come to you and they park in front of you, they come in, eat a sandwich, and get out. And then nobody else has any business out of that activity.
I know rumors get spread easy, but the originally we all heard that there was going to be no traffic on Florida Avenue, and we're like, what? So anyway, that's why we were panicked and wanted to make sure that somebody didn't have to walk a mile to eat, or we're going to have to start a shuttle service.
Business. You're really developing business. No, I'm just kidding. No. No, the idea is to really multiply the possibility of access to each single storefront. That's truly the core of why the Florida Commerce puts this grant out, because then the beautification is part of that, but also accessibility is paramount, because then you really start creating a differentiation also in the age of the people that can go shopping. So that's the entire idea behind that.
I have a question here on this side.
Hello, good evening. I hear you repeat a couple of times about how people walk with their wallets and how we're anticipating a lot of foot traffic along Florida Avenue. However, what is the long-term vision? Because we don't have retail on that right now. We just have old buildings. So it's like putting a pair of Louis Vuitton heels on with a pair of Wrangler jeans.
I live in Panama City, so I'm guilty of that crime. But if you ask Alan Branch, how did he feel 10 years ago? Or when we were doing the planning for the marina back a few years ago, sometimes David Bowie's song "Life on Mars" popped in my head back in 2008, living in Panama City, and there was nobody. I could walk on Harrison Avenue, whatever day, whatever time, there was nobody to cross a path. Eventually, it's an organic growth that is the most resilient way to develop, and the pedestrian infrastructure it works way better. I mean, since the 1960s, we've seen the mall effect in the U.S., where you have a pike where you're spiking up for 5 years, and eventually it's going to die, and it struggles regenerating itself. So creating something that it's bringing diffused commercial and retail at different scale into an urban setting that has a grid actually makes that entire system a lot more resilient also to change over time. And eventually it takes some champions to actually start, leading the charge too. But on the other side, from a planning point of view, it's very important the city sets the table up. So the infrastructure side, the parking, the stormwater retention, and all these kind of elements that nobody wants to see, but we all need. I used to have continuously this argument with the engineering director in the city of Panama City that he wanted ponds everywhere, and I kept telling him, frogs don't have wallets. I really want to make our economy sustainable. I need people walking, not frogs. And to me, parking is strategic to that. But also, a lot of different things that get into the planning and engineering of the city. And then eventually the table is set. So somebody wants to come and develop because now it's financially you can see the return on investment, and even the old buildings at that point are an asset instead of being a liability. And that's where, to me, in my opinion, it is important to see, okay, how does it look when we start actually stacking up? Is that something that we want to see as far as density and intensity of development and activity?
Also, just to answer your question about our long-term vision of economic development, first of all, we have to pay close attention to our businesses that are already there. This is the first and foremost thing, that those businesses grow. People want to come to that area. They already do. Bring more people down in that area. We're hoping that this will be the poster child as we go after those very mom-pop businesses, really targeting some of the businesses, some of the buildings that are vacant right now. That's going to be one of our focuses as well. And then that entire area, 9th, 8th, 7th Street, that we can really sell that as our downtown. So that's our vision, is to kind of sell that entire area as our downtown and bring businesses in, because people are looking for very quaint, small businesses that can grow in areas like ours. I know Victoria Last Bite does very well in that area. Some of the rest of the businesses do as well. And we want to continue for them to grow and other businesses to grow. And so our other goal too is, as people come into Lynn Haven, they just don't go past 9th Avenue. They actually take the turn and go down Florida Avenue. And so it's going to be a statement that people will know they're in Lynn Haven and want to do business here. We do have a business that helps us to identify other businesses that will want to come in this area. So we do have a long-term goal of developing Florida Avenue. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Ben is a part-time economic development person, but my goal is to really have a full-time economic development person who can go after additional businesses.
Does anyone remember what Pensacola was like about 12 years ago? I mean, you could walk downtown, there'd be like tumbleweeds blowing around, nobody down there. And storefronts were falling apart. Nobody wanted to be there. But they invested in a few things like this grant, and they got the ball rolling. And once the ball was rolling, it's doing an amazing service to the community, but also, if you want a good place to go eat, if you want to go, there's entertainment, so getting the ball rolling is such a key. Panama City downtown 8 years ago, you remember what that was like. As Antonio said, there was nobody to be seen. And then the talk of doing the streetscape, people started taking notice and started investing ahead of that. And they bought some old buildings and they had plans to redo the fronts. So, 5 years after they started that, now there's all these new storefronts, businesses, old buildings fixed up. There's all kinds of new shops. And I go down there because our shop is downtown. And Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, I hope I don't have to work weekends because there's no parking. All on the side streets, all other, it's active. That's what we're trying to help you get here on Florida Avenue, and it will work, because it's proven over and over again.
As we're talking about Pensacola, what Joe was saying is absolutely correct, but I'll tell you some other things that have happened. We now have a AAA professional baseball team. We weren't even planning on that, but the things we're doing now there, it attracted that. Also, because the new businesses are coming in, the new tax base, you should see some of the parks we're building over there. Even the little pocket parks to this big new waterfront park they just built on Johnson Beach, which is just down from the Wahoo Stadium, which is our baseball team, short walk from downtown. And if you go through Pensacola, you'll just see little parks popping up all over the place because the money's coming in, because the people came in. So you start small, and it grows. And to answer your question over there about, well, there's, you've got all this beautiful stuff, but there's not really a whole lot of retail up and down there. Well, I think what we're doing is we're holding out the carrot, and the rabbit is the retail. That's basically the way we kind of look at it over there. And it works. Rabbits like carrots. So
We have a question over here.
Thank y'all. When we build, what about water runoff? Are we considering that? Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah.
Yes, it is an issue, but that's why we plan ahead.
And
that's why, to me, it's important
that's
to actually.
Martin's job, but we're gonna look at exfiltration under the sidewalks, for example, where we have linear systems underneath the pavers where you do the attenuation and the treatment. And there'll be a lot of innovation instead of creating impoundments, which has been the traditional way of engineering stormwater in the past. So
We'll have to place them around the development.
Yeah. I think
they will be there. They will not be quite as visible. Because they will be integrated into other systems. The idea though is we want ease of access. So a pond smack in the middle of Florida Avenue doesn't do us any good. It doesn't produce any revenue. It's just a cost in addition to the system. So that's where the parking, it's a very important aspect of it because we need access, we need the storage. We can actually, just like Patrick was saying, underneath the parking. So that one becomes part of we have to have an outlook into what is going to be the intensity of the development and what is going to be the surface ratios that we're trying to get into, because then impervious becomes an issue, as you all know. We already have issues, so we want to make sure that by developing, we actually make things better.
So right now, we're not planning to impact impervious surface that much. What we're doing, it's the same right-of-way, it's the same area, it's just reconfigured, right? But we've been talking with the city about eventually, as that ball gets rolling, we need the infrastructure, as they were saying, to convey that water to a point where then we might treat it. So, for example, the city may buy a lot down at both ends of Florida Avenue where we can use gravity to get that stormwater to, but exfiltrate it, as Patrick said, and let the surface be a usable park type thing. So yes, whoever asked that question, it was a good question, and yes, it has to be planned for. But right now, we're not really increasing that impervious surface with the streetscape.
Yeah, but it's important to plan for the future because, you see, I'm going to play another head. I'm a developer. I got $500,000, and I'm thinking I want to start a business on Florida Avenue. I got to go and hire a civil engineer. I got to hire the architect. I got to come up with conceptual plans. I spent several $1,000s into planning something that may not work, right? Where all of a sudden I start getting into my floor to air ratio, area ratios. I start getting into the complexity of planning, and I'm now out several $1,000s. And that's where, unfortunately, some cases, private developments make it easier for a developer to know that everything is already accounted for. They have a form-based code. You go there, boom, and you know immediately what you can build. But how that happens? Well, because they handle everything on the infrastructure side. So every single lot is shovel-ready. And to me, it's very important for cities, especially in older neighborhoods, to be as competitive as the private sector, to start anticipating what the developer wants, because then the carrot really comes to play. They want to come because you have one strong thing that they cannot build. It's history. And at that point, to me, there are two things that are really money cannot buy: the history and the landscaping. That's why it's very important to get the landscaping established, because you cannot fake old, mature landscaping. And you have a city that has 100+ years of history, and by setting the landscaping now, you really become a very attractive asset for any person portfolio to say, yeah, I want to have some real estate on Florida Avenue. That's my personal take.
One more comment or two about your question on stormwater because it's very important. And it is something that, there's been a lot of changes in the past 20 years in the way we handle stormwater. And one of the things that's built into our design is the use of the concrete paver systems. The pavers that we're proposing for the parallel parking, those are pervious pavers. So you can create the exfiltration, the infiltration through the paver into the chamber beneath that, and that's where the stormwater gets attenuated, which is stored temporarily, and then treated. The same thing is true of the sidewalks. We can use a pervious paver for all of the sidewalks. Now, it's not 100% pervious, but by taking away paving in the parking area, for example, at the grocery store, which was not on the private lot, but actually in the right-of-way, we're probably going to have a net reduction in total impervious area, which is a great place to start for Martin. And, he's got a lot of numbers to crunch. But, we work closely because we want, we have to work as a team. And, we've been thinking about that. And I'm glad you brought that up.
We have one more question over here.
Two, actually. Let's stay on the subject of pavers. On the map here, you had a paving section in the center of 77 at 9th Street. Is that correct? Are pavers being used there? It was outlined here in a different color.
Yeah, what we propose there is a different system, though, because the DOT won't allow us to use the concrete unit pavers. So it's a textured and colored asphalt system that is approved by DOT. Now, it's not pervious. It's very, very durable because it has to be because it's a DOT highway.
I'm glad you mentioned that because a couple years ago, when we sunk money into the intersection of 9th and Florida, where there is a paving design, we wanted to put it in 77 and 9th Street, and we were told not to by the FDOT because it didn't wear well.
That's right.
So you're using a different substance there.
That's correct. We're using a DOT-approved, colored, textured asphalt paving system. You're welcome.
And next question's for you, Ben. What was the amount of the grant?
$4.3 million. Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I had to tell the stormwater man that Michigan Avenue is underwater and the kids are surfing on it. Years ago, this was tried. And in reference to what the young lady said there, you are correct. She is correct. But it was not just one location, not two, it was 4. And DOT did not disapprove it. City of Lynn Haven shut it down because Lynn Haven could not support future maintenance on that. Lynn Haven did it. As I said, all this stuff has been tried before, down to those pavers. The thing you forget, this is Florida Avenue, and it was built 1911. That cement out there is 1922, the original road. It is the widest street in Lynn Haven, purposely, because it was the only street that went from Lynn Haven to Panama City, beside the railway. Ohio Avenue was dirt. Everything went down Florida Avenue. You're only doing a small section. You're painting lipstick on the pig with your designs here. You're having those buildings that are there and privately owned, coated with paint, architectural changes, and you're presenting that as part of your picture. That's a false statement. Those buildings are privately owned. Florida Avenue, all the buildings are there are privately owned. None are owned by the city. Example, after the hurricane, every city building was either damaged severely or destroyed. There are none left on the other side of Ohio Avenue. The only ones that are left that are old are on this side. I have a question because it's
Also, I would like clarification on the
it's
falls.
telling you that this has been tried before. CRA took care of it, Main Street took care of it, and it was all, Main Street disappeared and was dissolved. CRA couldn't keep up with it, and when you put down plants like this, you learn a lesson. The question is this, it was mentioned, irrigation. If you don't put irrigation in here, those plants are dying. Most of the plants out there are taken care of by the garden club. They've been replaced. The trees have been replaced. Trees died, didn't have irrigation. My question is this, it's more of a form. I'm telling you, this has been tried before, it failed. You're going to send good money after bad money. You don't have it approved, and this doesn't sound right. It just doesn't sound right. I would suggest that you allow people to come to meetings again, like today, advertise that you're having meetings, and get the input that they've got, that they had at the first meeting, which I attended. And we gave you the input. Nobody listened. The second one, nobody listened. The third one, we weren't even invited. Only the business people were invited. If you think you're going to increase the businesses on Florida Avenue, no, you won't. This is a pass-through city. You pass through on 77. You don't stop here. Don't stop.
Apparently you stopped.
Okay.
Got a question over here, Ben?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Yes, sir.
From the state.
State of Florida.
From the state of Florida. So Lynn Haven's not paying for it. The grant.
I mean, in percentage, small percentage.
Yes, the grant is 100% funded through the state.
Okay. All right. So we've got to use the money, correct? Because it's a grant.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
Otherwise
use the
it
money.
goes back.
Wrap it up. Okay.
As a side note, I sure hope you buy flowers every now and then. They die, though.
Joe, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. I think we answered all the questions. You want to say a few final words?
I would like for you to please put a few of the things in writing that you feel weren't addressed, because we'd like to look at that again. This is for the whole community, and we want to make sure that these ideas are sound. Right now, we feel we're in the right direction. Okay, we put some fake buildings in there. Sorry, we'll take some out so you can see it. But it doesn't change the idea, the concept, the goal. And I do think it is good for the city of Lynn Haven. I do think it is good for Florida Avenue. It's that beginning step that we've seen over and over to promote sustainable growth. And it may be a pass-through city, or have been. A lot of people live here. I have a lot of friends that live here, and they love the city. And they would like to spend more time here than having to go somewhere else. So I think it's worth a shot. Let's use the state's money and do the best we can. But please send us those, because I don't want to overlook something that may have been said that we should put in the mix. So thank you all very much. We appreciate you.